1989 is a long year. It's a very interesting year, and this day is as long as the year 1989, so we are moving forward. We touched upon Czechoslovakia briefly with Ganj's balcony speech, but we are returning now, so to say, with full emphasis to Czechoslovakia. 500,000 protesters at the Civic Forum rally in Czechoslovakia. This is November 20th of 1989. Actually, the crucial date for Czechoslovakia that is remembered is November 17. But I did not put this iconic figure, but this November 20, because it has this big support of protesters of that day. In conversation, we have Jennifer Bergerova from BISLA College in Bratislava. Very happy that you're here, that you can join us for this. And Philipp Ther, Professor of Eastern European History at the University of Vienna. Philipp, you're an old friend of the Institute as well. Very happy to have you back here. The floor is yours.
Thank you. We agreed that we will keep the procedure that first the younger person and you know the more distant recollections or reverberations, and I will be silent. You know, should not be an old man's show. So please.
So glad to be here. Thank you. Since I'm probably the youngest speaker here, since I have no personal memory of '89 because I was born in Slovak Republic in '93. So the only kind of recollections which I have is the constant talk and what we have in a household, in a school, and within each other. I would like to stress out that it's really important for Slovak society as such, because we really do have those kinds of generational talks, communism, yes or not. This is a daily struggle of young and older people in households, whether communism was good, was better, what it brings, and whether our democracy and freedom is much better. I would start maybe that the numbers of people in the street at '89 were tremendous and becomes a symbol for the younger generation, and especially feasible these last 2 years. As you may all know, in 2018 was a journalist murdered, and it was a huge protest on which also students started and were ringing with the keys, as well as during the Velvet Revolution. So it was really feasible that they are recalling the Velvet Revolution in '89 in 2018. And we, as a younger generation, I believe, have feasible responsibility for what is going to happen afterwards. But what is maybe my first question for you, the time in '89, the November, was full of hopes, excitement, fears of change, and people were afraid also the fact, what I heard from my family and my environment, that even though it's going to change something, it would not be really a change. But what happened was that November '89 did break the communism, but then even more violent era of Mečiarism came, and now we have a murdered journalist. So did something really change? Wasn't the fear really like, isn't the fear really omnipresent?
Well, then I think it would be different kinds of fears. I mean, of course, if you have the situation like in Slovakia more than 1 year ago, then obviously this inspires fears. If you have this kind of mafia-like murder. Well, and then it turned out that it is internal mafia primarily, not the people driving a Ferrari in Eastern Slovakia, in Michalovce. But anyhow, when I did not go to Slovakia now at that point, so I only had the media reception of those demonstrations, and I think it showed a positive legacy of 1989, very obviously. Not just on a symbolic level, right, using symbols, keys, but also that people really did go out on the streets and protest. More so than in Hungary. So I think there's something which is preserved there. and which is one of the many legacies of '89. Of course, also, one could consider other legacies. I mean, the amount of criminality, corruption. That's maybe one of the many and also unwanted legacies of the transformation period. But in terms of fear, I mean, I'm quite sure that people were not afraid to go out to demonstrate in 2018. Like, people did not have to be afraid to go out on the streets in Prague, also in protest against Babiš recently.
Yeah.
I mean, another Slovak after all. Well, that is sometimes overlooked, when there's this Western perception about all the East going authoritarian nationalists. Yes, but there are interesting Czechoslovak traditions also in the Czech Republic. It's very twisted. But anyway, people were not afraid to go out and demonstrate against this evil pact between Klaus and Zeman. When you had very large demonstrations in Prague. So, but anyway, there is this legacy, and if needed, it can be recalled, and then I think it does have a political impact. Obviously, it had in your presidential elections. I mean, in the Czech Republic, we have kind of a repetition of this pact. Now it is Zeman plus Babiš, maybe even preferable than Zeman plus Klaus. But anyway, so there's a limited success, obviously, if you can have these kind of pacts and arrangements again. But the fear in '89, now to come back to that event, it was a different one. I mean, tomorrow you will get real checks on Slovaks, right? So probably they have more to tell. But because of family connections, I was in Prague in the fall of '89, and out of political interest, I was a student, 22 years old, and of course we were afraid to go out because it was not known how it would end. I mean, in the beginning of November, well, there was all full the secret police, then the militia, and they also could have chosen a Chinese solution, or then later, a Romanian solution. They didn't do it, but we didn't know that. And I think this made, so to say, created a special kind of atmosphere, and probably also memory of '89 is this mixture between fear and then suspense or relief. So on November 20, this was still on the Václavák. I mean, then there was 1 week later even bigger demonstrations on the whole weekend. By then, the fear was already kind of alleviated, right? And one would have known that Havel was already on the way to the Herat in a way. So, but anyway, for a couple of months, culminating then on November 17, there was indeed this fear. Now, when it was broken, the fear, and there was this relief, this was, of course, a wonderful moment of partying. There was something to celebrate, and I enjoyed that very much. For me personally, I mean, one could also know, being there, that now everything will change. The Cold War Europe is finished. That was clear. That was very clear. Another aspect about these demonstrations, I mean, I traveled from Germany there, from the south of Germany, from Bavaria. Another moment which I think is important, but also positively and in a way in kind of recollections about lost opportunities. I perceived the changes as kind of an encouragement, because in Bavaria we had another issue which was about the nuclear plant in the east of Bavaria in Wackersdorf, which was designed because of the Cold War, close to the border, in a structurally badly targeted region. It was kind of a post coal industry region, and And then the government promised, okay, now, you know, there will be this beautiful nuclear plant, and it will bring beautiful Wiederaufbereitungsanlage. Then, you know, will be the full nuclear cycles, and that, you know, everyone will live in prosperity and save energy. And we had all those demonstrations near to the nuclear plant, talking about fear. There was specific West German police battalions who beat up the demonstrators. You know, this was not only an Eastern Bloc phenomenon. A friend of mine working for Mittelbayerische Zeitung, she was visibly a photograph, a very slender woman, photograph here, you know, press sign, and they broke her, what is it, not the hip, the becken, I wouldn't know it in English. Well, it's not easy to break, right? So extreme police brutality. And coming back to Prague, the pelvis, yes, they broke her pelvis. So that gives an idea about how brutal the police was. And anyway, this experience in Prague, I perceive this as an encouragement that we will go back to those demonstrations, and eventually this nuclear plant was indeed abandoned. However, other encouragements were not taken because there was all these visa regimes, and so, you know, there was only very few Westerners going to Prague or to East Berlin. And, oh well, I mean, there was other things at the demonstrations, the values of the revolution, the democracy, the student sit-ins, and only very little of that, you know, got then conveyed to the West. So, and that was kind of the missed opportunity. So very little came across the still existing Iron Curtain. So that was, and so there could have been another encouragement. Okay, demands for more democracy, the practice of democracy, but I don't want to talk forever. But, you know, I think there was also a practice of those values of the revolution. And very little of that, unfortunately, came across to the West. So.
Yes, I think that there are like very two important points to stress out what you were saying. Also, the police brutality, which wasn't really a case, at least I can remember from the Velvet Revolution. It wasn't really that violent as you prescribed. Yeah, enough, but maybe not that much. But yeah, fair enough. But yep, I think, and still the constant feeling within the society, what they have done to those people, and they gained the freedom, and afterwards the freedom, the happiness, the joy should have actually came. But for Slovakia, it wasn't really the case. It wasn't really about the democracy, because that civic association, Public Against Violence, didn't seem to have much of a solution for example, very important person like a president. And it seemed that they just opened the job for anybody who kind of suits something, and that's what brings Mecsiar. And I think that for us as a younger generation, then it's very important to remind the fact that when we ask for something and have demands, it should be really clear, and we should have a plan B. Otherwise, it could end up not really well. But what I think that what was missing for both of the states is some kind of reconciliation. It doesn't seem, both states that didn't seem to reconcile the trauma which happened during the communism and during the days in November '89. So, and then what actually, how the growth of the society, especially on the personal level, can then be kind of bring up, how the people can forget all what was happening and all the brutality, the trauma, and kind of move on towards brighter future of democracy when they didn't reconcile.
Well, I mean, if your generation then has this kind of political consciousness, I would be very happy about it, especially if you bring it into effect. Because indeed, you know, the wrong people can exploit the right situation. I mean, the previous talk we just learned that, you know, also the communist regime in Bulgaria had a very effective way of recruiting an elite, which then in parts was able to succeed in elections and to remain in power. And in Czechoslovakia, of course, Mecsiar in many ways is a post-socialist or post-communist figure, of course. And how did he get there? With a recipe which we can observe in other post-socialist countries as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, he exploited the nationalist issues and nationalist feelings, that's one. And the other one, he also exploited a conflict about the reforms. However, there we need to point to the Czech side, where actually, Václav Klaus, with his insistence that this all needs to be a market economy without attributes, and by insisting on maximum speed, he also contributed to destroying the country. Yeah. I mean, in '92 then I was living and working in Prague, and this also came as kind of a shock, right? That you have first the liberation, there's a positive moment, so many positive things happening, and the first kind of sobering moment was already in the spring of 1990 when you had this kind of economic and a neoliberal turn. So there I would agree that this was a problem. And then, that the country kind of gets lost. And there was on the one hand, of course, the Magyar nationalism, but there was also this, not so outspoken Václav Klaus Czech nationalism, let's get rid of, the eastern part. They will just, be an obstacle for the beautiful development of the most neoliberal reforms without attributes. Market economy without attributes, market economy without Slovaks. Okay, congratulations. So this was this was also very, very sobering. But now I think I would like to mention a more positive account, which, there's all these moments of frustration and how did it go wrong, and maybe, the roots of the present day liberal tendencies and politics back in the 90s. But I think there was one important element. This attempts of democratizing the universities, public institutions, the economy, so the factories and all that, that unfortunately, went away pretty fast. Why? Because there was so much economic pressure, and then, how to have democratic assemblies when a factory is basically on the verge of breaking down, and it's not easy, right? So that got kind of lost. However, I think what was preserved in some ways was what I would call solidarity with colleagues on different levels. In '92, I worked in this press complex. There was exiled Czechs refounded a newspaper in Prague, and so I went there as well. And among the colleagues, there was a different sense of community. So everybody, the boss, the redaktorze, the secretaries, the printers, so the technical staff, we all went together for the meals. In Germany, I want to see the Chefredaktion of Süddeutsche Zeitung sitting together with the printers for lunch. And we also went out at least once a week for a Stammtisch, okay? So to the same hospoda and then sitting together and even spending private time. And I think this was a different sociability. And, if needed, also solidarity. And the second component of that was, in Germany, when I was a student, I had to earn money, and so I did that working as a freelancer also for Süddeutsche and then for the public radio and so on. Back then, I stopped it in the mid-90s with the PhD. And, in West Germany, there was always this sense of competition among the freelancers, and of course among the staff, who would get to which position, and that actually blocked communication within among the employees. There was always this, suspicion, and how much can I tell, and maybe the colleague then will fish my story, and a strong, very strong sense of competition. And in Prague, and the same is, by the way, true for East Berlin, where I also had an experience, this didn't exist. People were much more at liberty, the staff, the journalists, to talk with each other. And the same was then at the university. There was complete openness in talking about the projects, in planning conference, you know, what do you want to do, and not this sense of competition. If I tell something, then maybe, you know, the colleague might fish the stipend I'm thinking about, or might, you know, publish the big story which I'm just designing. And so there was much more openness among the employees. And I think this was also, on the one hand, a legacy of socialism, but of course, with, you know, the political and supervisors were removed, and also part of this new culture of openness. And there also was more openness in debates about history. That was also very clear compared to, I mean, at the Czech Academy of Sciences, the universities, we talked about everything, every single topic, and there was no obstacle. There were no, well, I don't like the word taboo, because what is a taboo? It's exaggerated usually. But anyway, there were no obstacles, and the same is true for Poland, by the way. There was talk about everything. Whereas in Munich, at the universities, first of all, there were hierarchies, and then if I, you know, remember the Sudetendeutsche Landsmannschaft, you know, Sudeten Germans, my God, they were living in a bunker, and then going to Prague and then threatening, and, you know, appearing in a very threatening moment, and with really the wrong composure, and again I had the impression, okay, maybe what the Czechs have is superior, what is in West Germany. Yeah. But how to convey that and how to change, you know, the play, how to transport that to the West.
I think that the solidarity is really a very positive, certainly, and very a legacy, especially not even that much of fall of communism as much as the fact that actually so many people came together to fight something they believed in. And so I think that this is what we also have in mind, like my generation, when we just look up to those people, those dissidents who started and almost sacrificed their personal life and their households in order to create the change, and all these people in the streets. We kind of look up to them that, okay, if 10 people, 12 people could have done this, well, we can find the regime which is not so violent, when we are not afraid to go outside. And this is the solidarity of '89, which I think also brings all the students in 2018 to streets. The very feeling that it doesn't matter whether we study arts, humanities, or science, we are all together solidary to actually speak up for something which is immoral, as our ancestors and pre-ancestors did in '89. Okay. So I think it really prevails, this positivity.
And now I have a question. I mean, how can you prevent... I think one of the problems of 1990, of course, already was, on the one hand, okay, there's, you know, the shift of the political system, the establishment of parliamentary democracy, with well-meaning Western advisors trying to accompany the process. But the establishment of this party system and then, you know, parliamentary elections, it also, on the one hand, it's positive. On the other hand, I think it had a demobilizing effect. The same is, of course, true for the round table in Poland in '88. Okay, there was strikes and mass mobilization. Then comes round table, and round table institutionalizes the dialogue. On the one hand, it's positive. On the other hand, it demobilizes people out on the streets who fight for something. So I'm wondering, you know, now in Slovakia, okay, there's upcoming, you had presidential elections. Which hopefully set an example for the region, including Austria. But what now? You know, you had this protest last year, and isn't there also a danger of, you know, demobilization, because now you get a parliamentary election with kind of a set system of parties, and then, you know, you have all the competition between the parties, the usual problems of, party competition, pseudo campaigns, populist slogans, lack of decency, out of measure. How can you keep up this momentum of mobilization, which we couldn't keep up?
I am not really sure whether we will keep up, but I hope. But really interesting about these upcoming elections is as we were talking, we Slovakia have elected first female president, and I was really happy about that. That was a really positive moment in Slovak history, I think. And there is a new emerging rather neoliberal parties, liberal parties, and centrists. But now, these few months, it's really weird. Like, that is probably the only word I found, because Slovak Communist Party was reborn from the death, it looks like it. And they even have a billboard saying, well, it's been 30 years, you have break the communism, are you happy? Like, they're really recalling for whether the people are happy within the society, which is hilarious and dangerous at the same time. Even Vladimir Mečiar announced he's going for a campaign. And so it really becomes polarized and really fragmented, the whole spectrum of the political parties. But I think that what they're not really going to make a huge boom and a huge change within the Slovak society, because I believe that they're going to just steal each other's votes, rather create a new kind of voters, rather the pro-Mečiar ex-voters, which are now really rather an old people, which is, again, as I begin this discussion, maybe the problem that the older people in Slovak society do have the belief that communism wasn't that bad overall, because they are claiming that the stability and arguments like, I didn't have to pay for a dentist, and now look, how expensive is it? It's like, okay, but you couldn't talk, like, what's better? And this is the kind of discussion of households within the younger and older generation. So if they're going to vote for Mečiar and KSS in Slovakia, it's probably going to be the older generation.
Okay. Well, I mean, if they do that, of course, I mean, this is another problem in this talk about history. I mean, indeed, I guess, there's I don't know whether that exists in the Slovak Republic, in the Czech Republic at the moment, since around 1.5 years, there's a pretty lively debate in one of the key about history, but this is about the revisionist historiography on normalizace, which really points out that, okay, on the political level, and of course for dissidents on a very private and personal and physical level, I mean, I knew people who were physically destroyed by being in jail, being jailed under communism. But anyway, for a lot of people, they had, let's say, a pretty normal life under the conditions of normalizace. Okay. So, and I think this is one of the good parts of this revisionist debate, that it acknowledges this aspect of the normalization. Now, the conclusions we draw from that is, of course, a complicated issue, but probably there's a certain segment of the population beyond, who are older than 60 years, who, might miss parts of the former life, and maybe the lack of acknowledgement then might even motivate them to vote for a parody of the Communist Party, right? So,
but they forget that maybe what I see, that voting for a communist party in Slovakia will not bring communism back. Like, this is because the political party seems to have the program of the political party seems to be very oriented towards the socialism, but like, there is, I don't think that there is going to be a possible output, something like voting for a Communist Party and becoming to be communist country again.
But do you think there would be a possibility to renew this mobilization of last year now under the conditions of this year? Or is it already kind of channeled because you have now basically a decent president? And
I think that the upcoming elections, which are going to be national elections, I think and I hope that the turnout would be and the mobilization would be high as much as it was during the presidential elections, because these couple, especially those elections which are upcoming, are really a disputable and very kind of sexy and really like empowering, because there is a lot of to talk about and a lot of intake, and also, already mentioned murder has really remained within the people, that this is not what they want, and since they were so many people in the squares, they will vote. I hope, I really hope. So, okay.
I don't know, in the previous discussions there was never any participation of the public. Maybe for a change, do we still have time?
You may disrupt.
That might be useful if anybody wants to contribute.
Philipp, you have this revolutionary spirit.
No, but participation is also an aspect of democracy. Sometimes forgotten. And we have 4 minutes only. Okay.
Well, this is not exactly participating. I feel I just have a simple question. I just have a simple question. In discussions of the role of emotions in politics in East Central Europe, particularly with regards to countries like Poland and Hungary, or other examples come to mind, nostalgia is an emotion that I hear a lot about. This is also true outside of East Central Europe in places like Britain or the United States. And could you say something about the role of regret? You mentioned that the Slovak Communist Party is asking people, well, 30 years on, how do you feel about what's happened? And do you feel like regret has a prominent role in Slovakia in politics? Do you feel like it has a prominent role anywhere else?
Well, it really depends about like regret of what, but the regret of the 89 that it actually happened, I really don't think so that people regret the change. I rather believe that they're not happy about the defect democracy which they have right now. So even though that they don't know really much how to articulate the fact that they are not happy with unstable and dealing with the unemployment, and especially young people struggling with their place and within a society, I think they just didn't pick up the right name. But I don't think that they regret the 89.
No, I think there's no reason to regret. I mean, and I think one should separate also in these debates. I think one really should separate, so to say, the democratic revolution, right, the very moment, the turn it got, then in the spring or summer of 1990. Things which happened usually then in the 92, 93, in various countries in various twisted ways. I think that should be kept separately. And of course, I mean, in nostalgia, nostalgia is maybe a more general, human emotion. When you grow older, you have nostalgia for, the time when your kids were sweet and little. You have a nostalgia from your own teenager years. And for the music of the times and so on. So there's various moments of nostalgia. But I think it could be, if it is not always kind of seen as as kind of a false or a false kind of memory, but acknowledged as a legitimate kind of feeling and put into something more political, then indeed, why not acknowledge that one can have nostalgia about equality or security? And why not have some nostalgia about the values in the fall and winter of '89? In a way to bring them up again. now in various countries. Because I think it would be useful. I mean, there's so many debates about things to be changed or which went wrong, also in Western countries. And then I think, to recall some of the basic values of the fall of '89, maybe in a, post-nostalgic moment. I mean, in a forward-looking mood, but also in terms of, recollecting what was once relevant in the past, then I think it's not bad at all, and would be a way to get this discourse about nostalgia, to repoliticize it and to utilize it in a different way to make it more productive. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the talk. I want to use the chance to ask you, as a professional historian, for Europe's history, to recollect it in 10 or 20 years, for the intergenerational memory, to recollect better how it was to work on the Holocaust and not, so 60s, 70s. How will people recollect how the Germans, bit by bit got to do even citizen science, and look how in their village, how long the Jews were living, young children were doing this. So if you had $1 billion for Europe in the next 10 years, what would be your methodological, or because you were talking about these atmospheres of openness and talking about everything, maybe this is constructible
I think,
for Europe.
I think I can give you a very straight and hopefully short answer, because I don't have to invent what could be done. In 2009, the documentation center Karta in Warsaw, they had a competition of memoirs. There's a Polish tradition doing that. Long, since 19th century. And anyway, they had, so they asked, former young people, but also, so to say, former teenagers to recollect the experiences in the experience in the 90s or before. Oh, 1 minute, okay. And then this 144 texts were sent in this competition. Some you can find in the internet. And I quoted them in, also in my current book. Well, what did people note about the transformation, who were, young teenagers, kids? Material advance. So, quite a few positive things. But on the other hand, an experience which was very, very different from the official kind of rhetorics, the Polish success story. And this was about, well, the parents being unsettled, phases of unemployment, insecurity, one parent migrating somewhere, because of a job, so only one parent left. And so what they recollected, many kids or juveniles then, was a not so happy childhood. And I think, as a professional answer, I would say, at the moment, what we should do is maybe have, competitions like that in other countries as well, to get exactly the mixed picture of what it was. On the one hand, material advance. I mean, in Poland, if you look for long durée economic history of Europe, hardly ever has any country caught up so quickly. It's clear. I mean, in the long durée, since 1800, since industrialization, 19th century success story would be Germany, but German Empire, and then the empowered Habsburg Empire. But anyway, so that's clear. But on the other hand, you have the experience, a bottom-up experience, which is very different. Contrast those stories, and then professional historians can try to bring that into a greater narrative.
So once again, I think we have to come to an end.
Yes.
Jennifer and Philipp, I think this was what we are doing here is a discussion of '89 and a discussion of the legacy of '89, and this is why for every talk we have also a representative of the younger generation to ask what does it still mean for us today. And I think this is what you did perfectly, not go into the historical happenings of that time so much, but more speak about what has become of it, how did it all develop, where did it go. And Jennifer, it was very great that you mentioned, let me say it in a double sense, the key moment of the revolution you mentioned. This is the crucial linkage of the protests of today, like this symbolic reference to the keys of the protests of that time. And just as a final word, maybe I think the memory of it is still very vivid, and how vivid it is we will see only in like 10, 11 days from now when we have the anniversary. And when we will see how all this links up to the protests against Babiš in the Czech Republic of today. So let's see, I think it might be a very, very current topic very soon, and we will discuss it very soon. So thanks to both of you, Philipp and Jennifer, for this talk. And once again, we are going to the break, the final break for today. Thank you.